In the busy city of Kumasi, Ghana, a small boy named Kwame stood at the doorway as his parents packed their bags and walked away. They left him with his week-old grandfather and never looked back. Kwame's little heart broke that day. He could not understand why love was not enough, why his parents chose money, power, and pride over him. Nights were long and quiet, and sometimes he cried himself to sleep, wondering if they would ever return. But his grandfather, Nana Kofi, though frail in body, was strong in spirit. He raised Kwame with strict discipline but also with hidden wisdom. Behind the old books and dusty walls, Nana secretly controlled a fortune worth millions, businesses, land, and accounts that no one imagined. Yet he taught Kwame not to depend on wealth but to grow with patience, strength, and loyalty. Years passed, and when Nana's health grew weak, Kwame's parents suddenly returned. They called him "our son" with fake smiles, pretending they never left him behind. But Kwame's eyes were sharp now, he knew they only came back for money. The day of the will reading came, and relatives filled the courtroom dressed in shiny clothes, whispering that Kwame was just a poor servant boy. But when the lawyer announced that all $4 million belonged to Kwame, gasps filled the room. His parents demanded he share, cousins shouted about family duty, but Kwame stood tall. Calmly he said, "You left me with nothing, so I owe you nothing." And with that, he turned his pain into power, using the fortune to build a home for children who knew the same pain of being abandoned, proving that real family is built on love, not money. Kwame's grandfather, Nana Kofi, looked like an old man who had very little left in life. His back was bent, his steps were slow, and his voice sometimes shook with age. To the neighbors, he was just a quiet elder living in a small compound with his grandson. But to Kwame, he was everything. From the first day his parents abandoned him, Nana became mother, father, and teacher all in one. Life under his roof was not easy. Nana believed in discipline. He woke Kwame up at sunrise, made him sweep the yard, fetch water, and read old books that smelled of dust and history. At times Kwame wished for softness, but deep inside he began to understand that Nana was shaping him into something stronger than he could see at the moment. What no one in Kumasi knew was that behind those cracked walls and simple living, Nana Kofi held a secret world. He was not poor at all. He owned lands across Ghana, buildings in the city, businesses that ran under trusted names, and even accounts overseas. But he never bragged. He never showed off. He lived humbly, eating simple meals and wearing old cloth, as if wealth meant nothing. To Kwame, he sometimes shared tiny pieces of his wisdom. He told him that money could build a man or destroy him, but character would always last. He told him that loyalty was greater than gold, and patience could open doors that strength never could. Many evenings, after the work was done, Kwame would sit by his grandfather under the stars. Nana would tell stories of battles fought, people betrayed by greed, and men who lost everything because they chased quick riches. His voice was slow, but every word carried weight. Kwame listened carefully, learning not just from the lessons but also from the way his grandfather lived his life. There was no guard at the gate, no gold chain around his neck, no sign of the fortune he quietly controlled. And yet, he walked with dignity that no crown could give. As Kwame grew, he began to notice things. Sometimes letters would arrive from faraway places. Sometimes strangers in suits would visit and bow with respect before leaving quickly. Sometimes Nana would disappear into a small office with locked cabinets, spending hours on paperwork. Kwame's young mind wondered why, but Nana only smiled and said, "One day, you will understand." That mystery filled Kwame with both curiosity and respect. The boy who once felt abandoned was now being prepared without knowing it. Every lesson in discipline, every lecture about loyalty, every warning about greed, was Nana's way of building him for the future. Though Nana looked frail, his spirit was unshakable, and his wisdom became Kwame's anchor. The hidden empire was not just the millions in property and accounts. The true empire was the values Nana planted inside Kwame's heart: patience, strength, and the courage to stand tall no matter how life tried to break him. The years passed, and Kwame grew from a lonely little boy into a strong young man under the watchful eyes of his grandfather. Nana Kofi was getting older, his hair now pure white and his steps slower than ever. The once strong voice that used to guide Kwame every morning now came out softer, sometimes shaky. It was clear that time was catching up with him. Kwame stayed by his side, helping him walk, preparing his meals, and reading to him when his eyes grew too tired. Their bond was unbreakable. But just when life grew quieter and Nana's health began to fail, shadows from the past returned. One morning, after many years of silence, Kwame's parents suddenly appeared at the compound gate. They wore wide smiles, their voices dripping with sweetness, and they stretched out their arms as if they had never abandoned him. "Our son," they called him, acting as though the years of pain and hunger never happened. Kwame stood frozen, watching them. These were the same people who left him at a weak old man's door, the same people who never sent a letter, never asked if he had eaten, never cared if he was alive. And now here they were, pretending, laughing, speaking softly, wiping fake tears from their eyes. But Kwame was no longer a child. His heart was wiser, his eyes sharper. He could see through their performance. They had not come for him. They had come for what they believed Nana was leaving behind. They had heard whispers of money, properties, and accounts, and suddenly they remembered they had a son. The change in their tone was clear. When they thought no one was listening, Kwame overheard them whispering to each other about the inheritance, about the land, and the businesses. They spoke like hunters circling prey. It made Kwame's chest tighten with both anger and sadness. For years, he had begged in silence for their love, and they gave him nothing. Now they begged for money they had not earned. They brought gifts for Nana, expensive wine and clothes, but their kindness was shallow. Nana, weak but still sharp in mind, noticed it too. He would look at Kwame with tired eyes, as if to say, "Do not be fooled." At night, Kwame lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He thought of every hungry night as a child, every tear that fell when he wondered why he wasn't enough for them. Now those same people wanted to hold his hand and call him son. It was almost laughable, if it didn't cut so deep. He realized then that family is not about blood, but about love and loyalty. His parents had lost the right to call themselves his family the day they walked away. Though he spoke little, Kwame's silence was louder than their fake affection. He no longer searched their faces for love, he saw only greed. And deep inside, he promised himself that when the time came, he would not let them take the legacy that Nana had built with strength, sacrifice, and truth. The day finally came when everyone was called to Accra's High Court for the reading of Nana Kofi's will. The news had spread quickly through the family, and it was as if bees had gathered to taste honey. Relatives who never visited while Nana was alive now rushed to the city in their best clothes. The women wore glittering jewelry, the men shined their shoes, and everyone carried themselves with pride as though the fortune already belonged to them. Some even argued in the hallway about who would take which house, which piece of land, which business. Their voices were full of greed and excitement. In the middle of all this noise sat Kwame, quiet in the corner of the courtroom. He wore simple clothes, nothing fancy, and his head was slightly bowed. But his silence did not protect him from their whispers. Cousins and uncles leaned close to one another, smirking, and saying things loud enough for him to hear. "He's nothing," one muttered. "Just the servant boy who lived off Grandpa." Another laughed, "What could he ever deserve? He's lucky he even got food to eat." The words pierced him, but Kwame kept his face calm. He had grown too much under Nana's teaching to let their cruelty break him. When the judge and lawyer entered, the room fell quiet. Papers were opened, and the lawyer cleared his throat. Everyone leaned forward, expecting their names to be called. Some women already pictured themselves moving into new houses, while the men imagined driving new cars. The air was thick with selfish dreams. The lawyer's voice was steady as he began to read. He listed Nana's properties, his businesses, his foreign accounts, and finally announced the total value, $4 million. Gasps filled the courtroom, and eyes widened with hunger. Some clapped quietly under the table, certain the wealth was theirs. Then came the moment. The lawyer paused, looked around the room, and declared, all assets, totaling $4 million, are entrusted to Kwame Mensah. For a second, silence crushed the air. It was as if the walls of the courtroom were holding their breath. Then came the sound, sharp gasps, angry whispers, chairs shifting as people turned to look at Kwame. Their eyes burned with shock, their mouths dropped open. The same relatives who mocked him as a nobody now stared at him as though he had stolen their dreams. Kwame felt his chest tighten, but not with fear, with pride and heavy responsibility. Nana had trusted him, not them. The fortune was not just money, it was a legacy, a final gift, and a reminder of every lesson his grandfather had given him. As his parents' faces twisted from fake smiles to pure rage, Kwame sat still. He remembered the hungry nights, the lonely tears, and the strength Nana had built inside him. For the first time, the whispers no longer mattered. He was no longer the servant boy in their eyes. He was the heir, chosen for a reason. The lawyer's voice carried across the silent courtroom as he cleared his throat and read the final line of the will. All assets, totaling $4 million, are entrusted to Kwame Mensah. For a brief moment, it felt as though time itself froze. The air was so heavy that even breathing seemed loud. Then came the sound, gasps, sharp and painful, filling every corner of the hall. It was the kind of silence and noise mixed together, the kind that only comes when a truth drops like a thunderclap. All heads turned toward Kwame. The boy they once mocked as nothing, the one they called a servant, the abandoned child who lived quietly in the shadow of his grandfather, he was now the heir. His parents, who only minutes ago had worn proud, smug smiles, looked like their world had collapsed. Their lips trembled, their eyes widened, and the fake tears they had practiced dried instantly on their cheeks. Stunned, they sat frozen, unable to believe what they had just heard. Their son, the boy they had thrown away like old clothes, was now the master of the fortune they had come to claim. Kwame sat very still, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. He did not smile, nor did he gloat. Instead, he felt a deep weight settle on his shoulders, heavier than any insult or any lonely night he had ever known. This was not just money. This was Nana's last and greatest lesson. $4 million was not simply wealth, it was trust. Trust that Kwame would protect the empire his grandfather had built with years of sweat, sacrifice, and wisdom. Trust that he would not let greed, betrayal, or entitlement destroy it. As he looked around the room, Kwame saw the greedy faces turn sour, cousins whispering in disbelief, uncles shaking their heads, and aunts biting their lips in anger. His parents' expressions were the hardest to watch. Their eyes, once filled with false love, now carried nothing but fire. He could almost hear their thoughts. How could the boy they abandoned hold everything, while they held nothing? But Kwame remembered every moment of his childhood, every tear, every hunger, every time he asked himself why he wasn't good enough for their love. And in that moment, he realized this was Nana's way of answering that question. He had always been enough. He had always been worthy. The lawyer closed the folder with a firm snap, but the echoes of the announcement still lingered in the hall. The air felt different now, as though the ground itself had shifted beneath their feet. Kwame took a slow breath, his eyes steady, his hands calm. He was no longer the forgotten boy at the corner. He was the chosen heir, carrying not just $4 million, but a legacy that could change lives. Nana had trusted him to rise above pain, to turn wounds into wisdom, and to build something greater than wealth. And in that silent courtroom, Kwame promised himself he would not fail. The moment the lawyer's words sank in and the shock began to fade, the room exploded with noise. Chairs scraped against the floor as Kwame's parents jumped to their feet, their voices rising above everyone else's. "We're family, share with us," his father shouted, his hands slamming down on the wooden table so hard that papers scattered. His mother, who had just minutes before pretended to cry sweet tears, now screamed with desperation, "You cannot keep everything for yourself. We raised you, you are our blood." Their faces twisted with anger, their proud masks ripped away, showing only the hunger for wealth that had brought them back. Soon, cousins and uncles joined the chorus, pointing fingers at Kwame as if he had done something wrong. One cousin leaned forward, his voice dripping with manipulation. "In Africa, family shares everything. You cannot turn your back on us. This money belongs to all of us." Another uncle shook his head, pretending to be wise. "Your grandfather would not have wanted you to be selfish. He would want you to honor family duty." Voices overlapped until the courtroom felt like a market, everyone shouting, demanding, and accusing. Kwame sat still, letting the storm rage around him. But inside, his heart was not confused. He remembered every hungry night when his belly ached and no one came. He remembered standing at the window as a child, waiting for parents who never returned. He remembered crying quietly into his pillow, asking himself why love wasn't enough for them. These same people who now demanded millions had left him to starve, left him to wonder if he mattered. They had not shared his pain then, so why should he share his blessing now? His parents grew louder, their words turning uglier with every breath. "We gave you life," his father shouted. "Without us, you wouldn't exist. How dare you turn against us?" His mother clasped her hands dramatically as if begging in a play, "Do not shame us, Kwame. Do not curse your own blood." The cousins laughed cruelly, one of them sneering, "You think you are better than us now? You think you are a man because you sit there with money that should be ours." But Kwame's eyes stayed steady. He did not tremble, and he did not argue back. Nana's teachings rang in his mind like a shield. Patience. Loyalty. Strength. His grandfather had warned him about greed, about how it twists people into shadows of themselves. Now, right in front of him, he saw those words come alive. This was not about love, not about family, it was about hunger for wealth. He breathed slowly, letting their noise wash over him. They wanted him to feel guilty, to bend under the weight of their voices, but guilt could no longer control him. He had carried the pain of abandonment all his life, and it had already made him strong. As their shouting grew wilder, Kwame knew he would soon have to speak, and when he did, his words would silence them all. The shouting in the courtroom grew louder and louder until it felt like the walls themselves would crack. Kwame's parents banged on the table, cousins pointed their fingers, uncles and aunts all tried to speak at once. Their words were filled with greed, anger, and guilt. They reminded him of family duty, they shouted about African tradition, they claimed that blood alone gave them rights to his inheritance. But Kwame had heard enough. Slowly, he rose from his chair. The room fell quieter, as if everyone sensed something was about to change. His eyes were steady, his back straight, and though his heart pounded in his chest, his voice came out calm, firm, and unshakable. "You abandoned me when I had nothing," he said, his words cutting through the noise like a blade. The courtroom froze. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of every year he had suffered in silence. He looked at his parents first, his eyes cold and clear. "When I was hungry, where were you? When I cried at night, who came to comfort me? You left me to suffer, and now you come to claim what you never built. I owe you nothing." The air turned heavy. No one dared to interrupt. Even the cousins who had laughed earlier now sat frozen, their smugness gone. Kwame turned to the lawyer and spoke with authority that surprised even himself. "Make it clear. No claim, no appeal, no demand from any of them will stand. This is final." The lawyer nodded, his voice respectful, "Yes, sir." The words echoed, sealing the truth like a locked door. For the first time, Kwame felt the full power of the legacy his grandfather had left him, not just money, but courage, dignity, and control over his own story. His parents' faces twisted in disbelief. His father's lips trembled with rage, his mother's eyes filled with bitter tears that were no longer fake but poisoned with humiliation. The relatives shifted uncomfortably, their empire of entitlement collapsing in front of them. They had walked into the courtroom expecting to walk out rich, but now they sat powerless, stripped of the wealth they thought was theirs by right. Kwame did not shout, he did not argue further. His calmness was sharper than any insult, and it hurt them more than anger ever could. In his silence, he reminded them of every failure, every betrayal, every year they had chosen greed over love. And though they searched for words to fight back, none came. They were silenced, not by force, but by the undeniable truth he had spoken. As they were escorted out, the once proud family looked smaller, weaker, and broken. Kwame stood tall, feeling no joy in their defeat, only clarity. This was the moment his grandfather had prepared him for. He had faced abandonment, he had faced hunger, and now he had faced greed, and he had not fallen. In that courtroom, with just a few cold, honest words, Kwame finally claimed his power. When the noise of the courtroom was finally over and the greedy relatives were gone, Kwame felt a calm silence surround him. For the first time in his life, he was not the abandoned boy standing in the corner. He was the man his grandfather had raised him to be. With the inheritance now in his hands, he did not rush to buy cars, houses, or gold. Instead, his heart pulled him back to the old compound where it all began, the small, cracked home where he had once cried himself to sleep and where his grandfather had taught him the meaning of strength. Standing in that yard, Kwame remembered the nights he went to bed hungry, the mornings when Nana woke him before sunrise, and the evenings when wisdom was shared under the stars. He decided that this place, filled with both pain and love, would not fade away. He rebuilt the compound, not as a private mansion but as a home for children who had known the same pain he once carried, children abandoned, forgotten, or left behind. The gates opened not for wealth seekers but for little ones needing food, shelter, and love. The same walls that had once held his tears now echoed with laughter. Word spread quickly through Kumasi and beyond. People came to see what Kwame had done, and many asked him why he had refused his parents and relatives, why he had chosen strangers over blood. Kwame would only smile softly and answer, because family is built on love, not on money. His words carried farther than he expected. They became a lesson to others, a reminder that true strength is not shown in riches but in how we use them. The $4 million his family wanted to fight over became something much greater. It became school fees for children who dreamed, beds for those who had slept on streets, and meals for those who had known hunger too well. The legacy Nana Kofi left behind was not just wealth, it was a seed planted in Kwame's heart that grew into hope for many others. And as he walked through the compound, now filled with children's laughter, Kwame knew this was the true meaning of inheritance, turning pain into purpose and building a family out of love.